Good evening, everybody. Good to see you all. Are you ready for Snowmageddon to come down? Yes, we have this big storm. I'm glad that we're meeting tonight, not tomorrow night, on the opposite end. My Google told me, how much snow are we getting here? And the Google, which could not be true, but you never know, said 18 inches. So we will see what we're getting. Anyway, it's good to be back with all of you, those in person, those on the live stream. We'll say a prayer and we'll jump in. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And good and gracious God, we adore you profoundly. We worship you. We thank you for the revelation of yourself and of your love. We thank you that you have communicated the life of grace to us through Christ, his incarnation, his dying and his rising, his sending forth of the Spirit. We thank you for the gift of faith, because faith itself is a gift that we can only have because you give it. We thank you for the opportunity to receive your grace, to cooperate with it, to come alive in it, to do the good that we're called to do. Lord, in this season of Lent, if we have seen times when we have chosen wrongly, and we knowingly did what we ought not to have done, we're sorry. Give us hearts that are contrite and humble. Open us up to the work of deeper conversion, and let us make right by reparation what we have done wrong. Make us tonight especially persons of truth, who come alive in relationship with the truth, who is more a person and less a concept. We ask that Mary Immaculate, St. Joseph, all the angels and saints pray for us. We make all of these prayers through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So tonight, our topic of conversation will be a witness to truth. Truth and beauty in the Catholic moral tradition. We've been progressing through the 10 Commandments, and we've pretty much covered all of them. I get the last, which is actually the 8th, because we did some combining of the other one. I love it because somebody proposed to me, having been here with you, I wasn't down in the room, of course, but Father John James got to do the 6th and the 9th commandments, the sex commandments. And somebody said, did he draw the short straw to have to give those topics, those classes? No, I don't think so. No, but we all just divvied it up last year, and we just did the same ones we did last year, and this is it. And when we divvied it up, I took this topic of truth, of being persons of the truth, of not bearing false witness. That's ultimately what's behind this. But when the Catechism of the Catholic Church, following the long tradition of the Church, speaks on the matter of truth, she does this not just in words, but also in sign, in vision, in how you portray things. There is a truth to an image, right? This is a weird reference, perhaps, right now, but you know, my family has deeply rooted in the United Kingdom, and my sister and her husband live there. And I love Princess Kate, but she's in a bit of a kerfuffle right now. You might have seen that she put out a photo of her royal children for English Mother's Day. You may not know this, but in England, Mother's Day is not the same day here. Our American Mother's Day is just a manufacturing of Hallmark. I mean, really, it is true. Hallmark was behind getting you Mother's Day in this country. But in England, they follow a more ancient tradition that's fully Catholic from the Middle Ages. The 4th Sunday of Lent, which we just celebrated, Laetare Sunday, the Sunday of rejoicing, also was called Mothering Sunday. And all over Europe, on the 4th Sunday of Lent, you had to go to one of two places. It was like an annual census. You had to either go to your church of baptism or to your local cathedral church if you couldn't get to your church of baptism. You had to go to your mother church one way or the other. So it wasn't about your earthly mother, it was about the church as your mother. That's what Mothering Sunday was about. And somewhere along the line, once Americans added on its Mother's Day, they took basically the same thing. They just set it on the 4th Sunday of Lent, so it floats every year. So Princess Kate, who's recovering from a surgery, put out a photo, but it looks like it was heavily doctored. I've done a lot of work on Photoshop myself. I pulled it up and I'm like, oh, Kate, what have you done? I looked at the thing and it is so heavily doctored. There's a lot of mistakes in it. And people are quite offended by this photo. I'm really quite surprised, but maybe I'm not surprised. Because people do this all the time, don't they? I mean, people Photoshop photos and you can now AI stuff and you can use your phone apparently. They think they actually know exactly what phone she was on because you can take best face and have it do composite photos. But people are up in arms because they think it's a lie. Interesting. An interesting concept for us to consider. It's a photo, it's an image that's lying to us. So lies are not just a matter of words, but how truth is conveyed in image as well. So we'll come on to all that as we have our conversation. But last week, you would have spoken probably more on the things that do with property. You shall not steal or covet your neighbor's goods. So in a strong 2,000-year-old Catholic tradition and then reaching back into the Jewish tradition, we've always had a sense of respect for material rights. Not the rights of the matter, but the rights of the person to have the matter. That you and I are both spiritual and bodily, and so there is something in us that needs bodily goods. And another doesn't have a right to deprive you of your legitimate bodily goods. So I put questions together around that. I hope they're somewhat germane to what you've talked about. Was it Father Mike who did Father John James? Okay, I trust them both. I'm just curious. I wasn't here and I didn't watch him, so if he didn't talk about any of these things, I just apologize. But answer my questions anyway. Introduce yourselves always as need be to the people sitting around you. Move if you have to. So don't have a conversation with yourself. That doesn't make for a very good conversation. Move around with others. So how do you see and understand the rightly ordered relationship to material goods in light of two simultaneous Catholic teaching? First, the universal destination of goods to promote the common good, and the right of private property, of private enterprise, and of personal labor. So just a reminder, if these were not talked about, the universal destination of goods says basically God has given all the things in creation for the whole human race. So the fabric, this is wool. This comes from sheep. I hope you know that's how wool works. God allowed sheep to come in existence, and they grew their wool, and they were shorn of their wool, not so that Father Sam alone could have the right to that wool. So even though it's my cassock, the wool I'm wearing right now, I didn't have a right to it because God gave the animal and gave the byproduct of the wool for the whole human race. Now, at some point, though, I can't share this with everybody, but it wasn't always mine, and so we can't have such an individualistic understanding of property. I don't own everything, and in fact, I don't own the land. Even the land that my family might have a house on, that someday my brother and sister and I might inherit, it's not our land. That's not how this works. That God has a universal destiny for the good of the whole human race. So there's an element that invites us to share and hold things in common. And yet God allows us to have a right use of private property. And so once it's established that it's mine, you don't have the ability just to bulldoze onto the property and take it from me. Now that this was legitimate in mine, you can't just rip it off and say we're going to give it to somebody else. So we have to hold a tension here. And sometimes that's hard. Private enterprise and personal labor. Because basically what you're saying is somebody might have property rights that extend to their own work. Isn't this? We've seen this recently. You saw how Disney has lost their first patent, and it's the old Steamboat Willie. That just happened in the new year. So the oldest version of Mickey Mouse is now in the public domain. And that almighty Walt Disney Corporation, which is pretty strong. I mean, we have those cute little animations, but oh my goodness, do not cross the Walt Disney Corporation. They will sue, they'll sue your pants off. The Disney Corporation lost its first patent, and they're going to lose all of them eventually. But we would have a conversation around that. And in fact, so much of political theory is based on these two principles. Capitalism and communism derive from them. And the Catholic Church for 2,000 years has always struck a balance, or we strive to strike that balance. So, how do you see this rightly ordered relationship of a common destiny to all goods, but yet an individual right to private property enterprise and your own personal labor. Personal labor, what am I mean there? Under communism, your labor is not yours. Your labor belongs to the state. The Catholic Church denounces that absolutely. Your labor is yours. You have a right to a paycheck. If you work hard, it's your work, and you have to be paid for it. The state does not get paid for your work. Another person doesn't get paid for your work. That's called slavery. So that's why the Catholic Church has always denounced that form of communism, because your work is your work. It's your personal labor, and you get remunerated for your work, not somebody else. So we got tensions in there. What is the rightly ordered understanding of the human relationship to the created world around us? So if we talked about God having this universal destiny of all goods, and at some deep level, the ground I'm walking on is not my ground, but I'm a steward of it, puts me in responsibility to it, to the universe, to the world around me. Given, that should be given, your state in life, that means, are you single? Are you married? How old are you? Do you have children? What are the responsibilities? What are the demands in your life? Your state in life is different than Father John James and mine. We are celibate priests who are given to a separate reality, and we do not live nor can live like laypersons in the midst of the world. But given your state of life and your particular Christian duties, how do you exercise your duty towards and the love for the poor? Father John James has taken a formal vow of poverty. He's become poor for the sake of the poor. That's different than you're expected to do. You're not expected to do that. No one in this room but Father John James, not myself included, has been expected to do that. I mean, you could discern this vocation and accept it and enter in and take the vow, but you are not called to become poor to serve the poor. But you have a relationship to the poor. And Jesus, throughout the gospel, keeps talking about how we're going to love the poor. And at the end of the Gospel of St. Matthew, remember the great scene of judgment? Everyone's gathered, and he separates the goat from the sheep, and he says, the righteous on his right, when you fed me, when you gave me drink, when you clothed me, when I was naked, visited me when I was sick, when you took care of me in my need, you did it for me. And they said, when did we do it? You did it for the least of mine, when you loved the poor. And when you didn't do that, you did it against me. So our judgment is going to be somehow related to how we love, especially love people in need. So, what's your duty towards the poor? Which I think could have a whole host of interesting questions, because here you are in the heart of Denver. And I've got people who live on my back alley on nights like tonight and tomorrow night. And we've got people who beg on the corners. But our poor are also, not always, but some of them are mentally ill, and some of them are high as a kite. And I have people ask me, I'm sure Father does all the time, what am I supposed to do? I don't want to enable a bad habit, but I do want to love the poor. How do you do that? Oh, I don't have any answers for that, really. All I know is we have to keep loving the poor. But the concrete practicalities of how we do that, that's discerned. You might want to talk about that. I find that a fascinating concept. Like right now, I've been rather keen. I'm like, we give out food here, but it gets easy when you have a big storm or horrible cold coming in. I'm like, clothing the naked. That's an easy work of mercy right there. And most people on a back alley when it's so cold are not going to take the hoodie I bought them and gave them for free and turn it around for drug money. That's an easier one for me. Not always easy. And how does a good and devout Catholic, needing to live in this world, who's not called to poverty, avoid the pitfalls of envy and greed? Because the culture would encourage you of itself to take care of number one. Not only get by, get ahead. Climb the top of whatever little ladder you're on, amass that wealth, get richer and richer. But is that mentality Christian? And yet it's all around us. It's everywhere around us. We're breathing that air constantly. And people see themselves as failures if they're not getting ahead in life, not getting that promotion, not getting that better job. So I present you, and of course, money's a hard topic to have a conversation about. It's the number one thing that causes arguments in marriage. More than any other topic, it's money. It's the thing that Americans have been proven by surveys, it's easier for them to talk about religion, sex, or politics before the personal approach to money. So I'm inviting you to do the hard thing tonight. Talk about money and your relationship to it and how we navigate in a world to actually be authentically Christian. I'll give you about 15 minutes. On your mark, get set, go. Okay, my friends, I'm going to wind that down. I overheard great things out there. So let's jump back into our conversation consideration. If you remember at the beginning of our conversation around the moral life, the Christ life, we've been doing this for a number of weeks now, and I had one of the topics where I gave kind of a primer on the understanding of morality. I just want to put some words that I had on the slide weeks ago, a month or so ago, up here again so that we are always understanding how that moral response is multifaceted. So when the church approaches it, there's a lot of things to consider. First, our human nature. So thus, in light of revelation, so it's kind of a top-down thing of God, how he's revealed us to be, but how we also know ourselves to be, what sort of being we are. That means we have a certain nature. We're going to respond in a certain way. It's always wonderful to look at our pets and consider our pets because they're not us. We might love them with a human love, but they don't love us back with a human love. I mean, we anthropomorphize our animals all the time. We think that they're little humans, but they're not. And so I have a cat over there in the rectory, and though he is seemingly quite sweet on me, I have to admit that he doesn't love me back with a human sort of love. And so yeah, I do like that. But so you consider their nature, and they're acting out of their nature. My cat, his first priority every morning, getting me up, he'd get me up earlier and earlier if I'd let him, is the food. And he has to get me to that food dish, and he will use me. He will snuggle up with me. He'll do all sorts of things to compel me to get to that food dish. And then he'll be good throughout the day, but I can see, like, in his nature, the first priority is food. Human beings actually are a much more complicated thing. Human beings can set aside a lot of our lower instincts for higher ones. I mean, think of anybody, all the best of the stories of people who were self-sacrificing in the concentration camps, setting aside legitimate lower bodily instincts out of a spirit of service to others in the camps. Oh, human beings are fantastic. So we see our nature and we consider our nature. That's called the study of anthropology, which is different than how the scientific community considers anthropology. The very root word is just the study of man. That's what anthropology means. Understanding the relationship of God to his creation, the fact that God is creator, and so thus everything God creates is in relationship to a personal creative God. So thus, if God creates and is a personal God and he endows a nature and quality to his creation, it's informed by who he is and what he's made us to be. So we don't get to decide our nature. We don't get to decide our own moral compass, that we're in relationship to the Creator who made us in this sort of a way. There's an understanding of divine revelation, of human redemption, how God has revealed himself to us so that we can come to know him and respond to him. When that's at its height, that's Christology, because the perfect revelation of God is in Christ the Son, and how Christ works to save us. Soteriology is the study of how redemption is actually achieved and how reconciliation of the human race back to its God is accomplished. Ecclesiology is the understanding of the nature of the church. So we, Catholics, believe that this God who made us human, who has created us, who has sent us Christ, who saves, redeems us, he's poured out grace that flows through the church to change us and transform us, to make us a sort of creature able to come into real communion with him. But we have to have the church as a part of that. And then, with all of that in mind, understanding the human capacity to receive and cooperate with grace, we call that the study of moral theology. When we do cooperate with grace, or when we resist cooperating with the grace, and maybe even spurn it or let it die. And ultimately, it's all pointed towards the eschaton, towards the final things, towards the eternal kingdom, the new heavens, the new earth, the ends for which we were made, and by which we're led by God. So we're looking forward to this future reality. So all of this is informing this. It's not just a list of thou shalt and thou shalt not. It's a much deeper reality than that we're doing here. So all of this has been in our consideration. So with that still in the back of our minds, we're going to jump into the 8th commandment. You'll forgive all my English spellings. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, of course, as you've discovered with all of the commandments, they really unpack and become something more. Like the commandments are just a main bullet point, and then you can break out the bullet points underneath, and you can expand them. And what does that actually mean? I mean, because if you just read it, you show up, bear false witness against your neighbor. It's like, you won't lie on the witness stand. Pretty much, I mean, if you just push into that, that's pretty much all you get. But of course, you and I know it means something richer and better than that. And I think every little kid, at some point, if he's got halfway a working conscience, realize that when he starts to lie, even if he's getting away with it, between him and God, something's wrong. And then at some point, you have to, if you want to be a good liar, and you just want to go into those lies, you have to stuff and suppress that conscience. And there are people who get very good at lying, and they pretend they're not liars. And we even have words and terms for this, right? What's the expression that we use for somebody who's a good, habitual, long-term liar? I can't remember you have scientific terms for this. Pathological liar. Like they're so good at it, they don't even realize they're doing it anymore. It's a pathology, it's a sickness. But we don't celebrate that as a sickness. No one's ever used, you are such a good pathological liar. No, it's actually a derogatory thing. So in our culture, even if a lot of people are lying on a daily basis, we still know deep down it's wrong. And the thing of it is, even if we might be doing it, none of us want it done to us. That's okay. You can tell me lies. I'm happy with that. No, nobody's ever said that. We've all got kind of a double standard. Well, I can lie to you, but you can't lie to me. And then we get offended if we caught somebody up in a lie. Whoa, you were lying to me? Yes. Perhaps the worst I have ever seen has been lies when it either had lots of things at stake on the line, like in the courtroom, or when it was lies very close to love. Lies in families. Lies with the people you absolutely had a duty to speak the truth to. That's where, as a priest, I've seen it. One time, when I was a seminarian, I was the foreman on a first-degree murder trial. It's interesting how God, in his providence, allows things to come together. I've always kind of fashioned being a good citizen, and I kind of had a high-minded spirit around that. I think it is a good thing. And so I had never been a juror on any trial. I think I even at one point might have even said, Lord, I want to have that experience. Let me be a juror. Well, oh my, what was I asking for? It was a stabbing death that happened on a Super Bowl Sunday on this street. Literally on Logan, 4 blocks down at 20th. And I was a seminarian, my second year in seminary, and it was November, so it was the previous year's January, February timeframe, and there had been the murder, and then now they had built up to the trial, and I got the jury summoned. And of course, as a student, I was still technically listed at my family's home up in Berthoud, Lambert County. And so I did one of those, I'm off at school. I exempted myself. And then within a week, the city and county of Denver, this district, called me up. I'm like, well, I do want to do this. Of course, when you're called for jury duty, you don't know what case you might be put on. So I kept getting called, I got called in, got the number. I went into the old city and county building where they used to, I think, what did they film there? I think Matlock was supposedly based back in the day at the city and county building. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my Matlock episode. I went in, it was old school courtroom, none of this modern. It was like everything you would want the courtroom to feel like and be like. So my number kept getting called up, and then all of a sudden we're called in for voir dire, the jury selection process, and that was a whole day process. And you discover pretty quickly, they announced within the first 5 minutes, this is a first-degree murder trial, and the state's choosing not to pursue the death penalty. The Catholic, I went, whew, okay, that's better. I don't have to wade through that murky moral water. So I was happy to proceed on. I sat next to a fellow who, God love him, was probably the most, I'm going to say this, don't take too offense, he was the most redneck offensive person I've ever met in the city and county of Denver. He was just saying the most offensive things so he could purposefully get thrown off and not have to go on the trial. I loved it that the judge made him sit all day long and dismissed him last. Dismissed him, but had him sit there all day and didn't let it happen easily. And then I was one of the ones that was seated for the jury. And again, God's providence was over the whole thing. Because I knew this neighborhood. I've been coming to the cathedral a long time. I knew every street and block here. We weren't sequestered by staying at home, but we were told that we could not visit the scene of the crime. But you see, the murder happened at what was the Horseshoe Lounge, and it involved him coming back from buildings. The victim had left, had come back. There was movement through these streets. And then they had an altercation right at the intersection of Logan and Colfax, and that's where the murder actually happened. But some of it actually was dependent upon the nature of the geography of this neighborhood. Well, I said, I know it well. I was back in the jury room drawing maps back there for everybody. I'm like, I know this neighborhood well. Long before I ever thought I was going to be living here and the rector of the Cathedral Basilica. So we had that on our side. I mean, literally it was a stabbing death. So we were like, and part of it also came down to like the method by which, so we're back there with the actual murder weapon, and the jurors and I are like, we're all like, I'm helping reenact the nature by which he died, because it came down to, he had claimed self-defense. So, I mean, it literally was like a movie scene of like, we're back there trying to figure out how we would have done it, kind of a thing. But we went through all the normal proceedings, and we found him guilty of a lesser included. And and he knew I was a seminarian, a future priest. I wrote man in prison and tried to form a connection with him, because even those who are condemned must be loved. And so we had that. But the public defender who defended him, turned out, I didn't realize it, was the brother of one of our priests. Like, how does this happen? And I asked through that priest's family, why was I ever, because I was told you never see lawyers or clergy on jury. Why did they put me on a jury? And they said, yeah, we talked about it. There was like with the judge, we talked about you behind closed doors. And because there was a debate, and the prosecution said, we both wanted you, because the prosecution said, you will be a man of justice. And we said, the defense said, you'll be a man of mercy. So you should be on the jury. I was like, that's a big billing. I hope that's true for all of us. I think all of us should be persons of both justice and mercy. That would be the ideal configuration. And then I was just made the foreman of the thing. So it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, leading 12 persons in a conversation around the fate of another human being, where quite honestly, we all knew that almost every witness was bold-faced lying to us on the witness stand. They were caught in it. Even the lawyers were using words like, you just perjured yourself. So like, I have to admit, no, under oath doesn't mean anything in our society much anymore. I mean, the fact you're swearing that you will let yourself be damned if you lie up on that witness stand. That's what we mean when you go under oath. I swear before, nobody's got a Bible out anymore in these courtrooms, but that's what you're agreeing. I will let myself be damned if I lie. And here I am like, and I'm the young seminarian about to be a priest. I'm like, oh, they're all lying. It's like being caught out in their own lies. So it was the hardest thing to wade through what actually happened or not because of that night. I also loved it. This is your civics lesson for the moment. We had one man who wasn't on trial, and he kept invoking the Fifth Amendment. So just for your knowledge, you don't have a right to just take the Fifth on anything. You actually can only take it when you are being tried with something. So you don't have a constitutional right to keep your mouth shut and not talk, but only when you're being tried for something. So like both sides, and the judge said, sir, you don't understand the Constitution. You can't take the Fifth Amendment and keep your mouth shut. It's not how the system works in this country. Like it was like news to him. And then he just didn't know what to do. So then he just lied for the next 20 minutes. So I have to admit that was probably the worst abuse of truth I've ever seen. Because we really needed to get to a man had died by a stabbing, and another man claimed self-defense, and there had to be justice. And when people lie, how do you get to the justice? So that's probably the worst I've seen. The other worst has always been husbands and wives. People who really should love each other, and when those get ugly, they get ugly. The commandment forbids representing the truth in our relations with others, either by direct lies or sinful omissions of necessary facts. So it's important we understand that. A direct lie is, I know that this is a falsehood, and I'm presenting it to you intentionally for you to believe as a truth. And a sinful omission is when you have a right, and not everyone has a right, but when you have a right to the truth, if I withhold that truth, that is also an abuse. That's a lie. There are certain things that we don't have to open our mouths about. But there are certain things that we might. So when you're called in for a jury and somebody has been murdered and the other person's on the stand, and you have facts about the case, you don't have the option but you can't tell the truth. You have to tell the truth. And if you omit that truth, well, that'd be a grave act. And this would also happen, I think, in the life of families and certain key relationships. But there's also things that we can just keep our mouth shut and no one's obliged to have to talk about. So, I mean, it's the little white lies. I mean, there's a principle that we shouldn't lie. And I think God's given us an intellect that we can actually avoid lying. You actually don't have to lie. There seems to be this thing in the culture, everyone, well, I have to lie at certain. No, you don't. Either just tell the truth or just keep your mouth shut. And did anyone say that, sometimes you can say, well, I'm not going to talk about that. You can say that. You have the right to say that. And the other person cannot say, well, you tell me what you think. No, I don't have to tell you what I think. You don't have a right to it. So we actually need to grow a moral backbone and start saying, when you don't have a right to it, I'm not going to give it to you. And then you've got the stupid things like, does this dress make me look fat? There's no right answer to that. Because we're going to say, oh, yes, dear, you look extra large in that one. I mean, you might be honest, but is that an honesty that's helping anything? No, I think every man in the room's like, oh, no, I'm never going to say that. But is that a question that should even be asked? I think that's the moment you say, the husband should turn to the wife or the boyfriend to the girlfriend and say, dear, you can't ask me that question. I love you, and I'm not going to answer that question. You can do that. Get a backbone. That's what that looks like. You have to set boundaries around some things. There's other times and places when we might just do that. Not everyone has a right to everything, which is so countercultural right now because we live in this really weird culture of oversharing and then getting offended when privacies go away. Right? It's this whole TikTok, Facebook kind of a culture. We put the most perverse facts out about everything in our lives, and then we get indignant when we couldn't control it. So we need to come back to a better relationship with truth, which ultimately pushes us in relationship with persons. And not every person is owed the same truth, but you can't lie. So we live the truth. And I put capital T there because it's ultimately Jesus is the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. We're called to be in communion with him by being truthful with our speaking. In the Old Testament, it says time and again that God is the source of all truth and that God even hates liars. I put hates in quotation marks there because God, at some fundamental level, never hates anyone. He hates sin. He doesn't hate person. So he hates the sin that's in us. He doesn't hate us because he desires us, and he always will work to get us back to himself. But when there is something opposed to his will, he hates it in us. So he hates the lying in us. He hates our lies. Jesus reveals himself to be ultimately the way, the truth, and the life. And he calls his followers to actually live in the truth, to live the truth, to live in the light. I mean, it's funny, we even use these words. We're still informed enough by a Christian culture that we even use these words. Jesus, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the light of the world. He calls us to live in the light. All these are scriptural things. And so we often even still in our culture would say, got to put in the light, man. Got to live in the light. That's Christian language because that's language about Jesus and living in relationship with Jesus. That's how he used those words. Philosophically, truth is a necessary pillar for the maintenance of all human society, from the family to the state. If you don't have truth, you can't be in meaningful, right relationship with persons, and every level of society will break down. If the husband and wife and their children can't have at least some system of truth, families will break down. They do all the time. We live in a culture where I think we're at about 48% divorces right now. And so many of those were brought about by a lie that happened in there. Maybe it was a small lie, then it festered and grew. Maybe it was a double standard. There's a lot of different reasons people go those directions. But the family is dependent upon truth. Some of those truths are hard. I know they're hard. If we lived in the light, though, and maybe avoided needing to get to the reasons why people cover over their tracks and lie, things would be better. But I mean, if you even look at the larger scales of our society, I mean, after, and it's been for a while now, it's not even recent. I mean, I always am hesitant to talk about politics. It's so messy. This is going to be a messy year. I love good politics. In America, we're not the only country. We're all broken right now. The fact that everybody has to do so much fact-checking around fake news, right? And both sides do it. Every television station, even if they themselves might misreport things sometimes, they all are claiming to be fact-checking around fake news. Everybody does it right now because we all know how much lying is going on. And you can't have a society that's functional when it's based around lies. I think that's why my little silly Princess Kate thing kind of comes to the fore. Like, we were in the back, I was talking to Isabel and Father about, people doctored photos for a long time. I was talking about my senior photo in high school. Different parts of the country and different areas have done different things. Some parts of the country do super formal indoor shots. Even I see even the South. I've seen it where some men get in tuxes and sit in a room and like the senior photo is like a very formal photo. Oh, not in the state of Colorado. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Like, we all pretend that we just live outdoors always when we do these. I think when I had my senior photo, which was over 20 years ago, I was out in some field I've never been in before. I'm trudging out there with the photographer, and I'm nestled in some rough, tall grass as if like I'm some pheasant, burrowing away down there. I'm like, I don't live like this. And if anybody knows me, I'm like one of the least like outdoorsy type in that kind of a way. If anybody's going to be an indoor photo guy in Colorado, it's probably me. But like, that's what we do. But I remember it was, in my junior year, before my senior year was being taken, and I still had braces on. And they said, oh, don't worry about that. We'll just digitally remove your braces. That was standard practice. I didn't even pay anything more for it. It was just, you take them off and they said, oh, and we'll remove any blemishes from your skin. So you had that pesky zit as a teenager that day, gone. So my photo, like, it's not a lie, but it's not telling me the full truth either, right? And I think we all kind of get it and morally kind of accept that with these types of photos. But then I gave the example, but what if we sent a photojournalist to a war front? All of us would want the exact photo and no doctoring whatsoever. And I think we all would know that if you doctor it, something's really wrong. So a little doctoring on a senior photo, well, it's the game we all play here. Make me look better. But at what level does even that push up against, an offense against truth? But it tells me that in certain things we realize we need the truth. We want to see it as it is. And truth is a pillar of how we live with each other. Truth or truthfulness is a virtue that of showing oneself to be true in deeds and truthful in words, and in guarding against duplicity, dissimulation, that's deceitful concealment, or hypocrisy. Because all those words are things that I think none of us would approve of, right? No one likes it when somebody's duplicitous and you catch them in their duplicity. No one likes it when there's the dissimulation. That's like when they've done that and I think every teenager gets good at this one, the dissimulation. Like, you create the false story to cover your tracks for the thing that you did. And then a good parent catches you in that. And then all of a sudden, then you're cooking up a new story to cover the false story that you told. So that's what it is. But I think at some level, you don't like it. And usually I find that most people change the tune when they become the adult or the teenager themselves. They're like, well, I might have been a big liar when I was a teenager, but you can't be. Like, because I think deep down we all know that the truth is important. Oh, and hypocrisy gets us going like crazy. When you have like a politician who's a big hypocrite, oh, that's a good media day, isn't it? We talk about that a whole lot. So I think these are all things that touch very much into our lives, but actually show that we ourselves are hardwired. We want truth and we expect truth. And when there's not truth, we know there's a problem. So we're called to bear witness to truth. Christ, when he came among us, said that he has come into the world to bear witness to the truth. You remember what Pontius Pilate said? That's why I put that image up there. And Pontius Pilate says, what is truth? Does it even matter? Is there such a thing as truth? Jesus kept his mouth shut because in one sense he's saying, you're looking at it. This is what truth looks like. So our truth as a Christian, being in relationship with Jesus and speaking truth in front of him. A Christian is not ashamed of testifying ultimately to the Lord, the highest level of that, witnessing to our faith. Because the deeper we get in faith, especially, and we know the Lord to be true, we can't cover that over. And I think that I'm putting this up there because I know that's going to be a particular temptation, anybody who might be becoming Catholic for the first time. Because there will be an element in our culture, I think every one of us who are Catholic have faced this. You know, in certain conversations, people will say things, and we're going to be tempted to like just cover over the fact that we're Catholic. We don't want to make waves, or we don't even want, like, not that we have to go out and like, we're not Bible thumping people here. You know, you don't have to go to King Soopers and convert everybody in the shop, but we can't lie about our faith life and give our witness of faith. And sometimes the Lord does actually ask us to give a proactive, positive witness, a sense that I want to talk about Jesus and my faith. And yet the temptation would be to cover that over, to avoid that, not do that, and worst of all, to deny the Lord or the faith. A Christian bears witness to the gospel and all the obligations that flow from it, both by word and deed. And I think that's why it becomes worse when a Catholic is a hypocrite and duplicitous. Because people should expect something more of us and hold us to a higher level. That's why it's the worst of the worst, if you will, when priests do it. When we profess one thing and we're the very spokesman of it, and then we do the opposite of it. There's not only the objective gravity of the sin itself that might have been done, there's the double element of you gave bad witness, like you're a hypocrite. Now, at some level, we're all broken, we're all sinners, right? Every one of us in the room. So at some level, none of us is rising to the level of what we believe. So we're all hypocrites. Welcome to the club. At some level, we're all hypocrites. So we're just going to do the best that we can do, as imperfect as we are. But it means we let the Lord's grace keep lifting us up, purifying us, and help us live more and more according to our faith, according to the light, according to the truth. We do this in words and deeds. But we don't want to give bad example. And the supreme heights of Christian witness may be expressed in martyrdom. Not everybody's called to this, but that is the length of somebody who's willing to stand so strong, so firmly for the truth of God and their faith. They're willing to die for God and their faith. They won't deny the Lord. And there's so many amazing stories of martyrs. I love the saints. I absolutely love the saints. I encourage you, love the saints. They're alive in heaven with God right now. They're looking down upon us. They're praying for us constantly. They want our friendship. They're not God, but they're really close to him. They've lived lives that were holy in this life. Now they're completely transformed. They're in his presence. There's nothing impure about them. And their prayers are so strong because they're face to face with the Almighty. And when they were with us in this world, they lived beautiful, heroic lives, some of which might be like our lives. We can learn things from them. Look to the early example of the apostles. All the apostles were simple working men. None of them were lettered or learned. No one had university degrees. They didn't need them. They were fishermen. They were tax collectors. And the Lord called them. He changed everything in their lives and bid them to be close to him. And then, of course, the course of the centuries goes on. In the first couple centuries, we've got rounds and rounds as the faith is spreading. You got all these rounds of martyrs during the persecution of the Roman Empire, the Diocletian persecution, all of these different ones, where in different points of the early church's experience, an emperor or governor would get angry and blame the Christians for something and order wholesale murders of them. And great stories come out of that. Some real heroic death. Ignatius of Antioch. That's a saint right there. Look up Saint Ignatius of Antioch. He's even saying, feed me to the lions if you need to. I don't think that's always how you have to live your life. But he wanted to give witness to Jesus, and he didn't want to betray his faith one bit. Oh, and then you go down the centuries. I have a great love for the time of the English Reformation, because that's where people of my family, so to speak, my people, had to stand up for the Catholic faith. I look to the example of Thomas More, St. Thomas More. I love St. Thomas More. A holy, learned layman, a lawyer by trade. It's at least proof that one lawyer got to heaven. That's a joke. Many do. But St. Thomas More was a lawyer who became a judge, who became the Chancellor of England, the most important job after the king, the overseer of the treasury, a high court official administering justice. Everyone knew St. Thomas More to be a man of sterling integrity. He wouldn't take a bribe. I mean, it was just no one in his life. He turned to me and said, "You're trying to bribe me." No. I mean, the man was a straight shooter. There ever were one, and a devout Catholic. He lived in the Chelsea neighborhood of London. The current Catholic seminary for priests is on the grounds of his old house, which I find super cool. Some of the trees on the property date back to his time. He would have sat under some of those trees. And he would go to church 3 times a day. Go for morning prayer, for Mass, and for evening prayer. He was a layman who prayed. I mean, that's extraordinary. I mean, even the holiest lay people don't do that much church. That's pretty good. This man was the real thing. And he got into high places of power. You can be a devout, good, holy Catholic and get into high places of power. Power does not have to corrupt if you let Jesus be your highest power. And eventually the king, after 20 years of marriage to Queen Catherine, decided this wasn't the woman he wanted anymore, and he was going to put her out, even if the Pope had said there was no grounds for annulment. And he said, what's the Pope know about things like this? And so he decides to get rid of the Pope and the Catholic Church and say, I'm founding my own church. I'll be the head of the Church of England. And Thomas can't do that. He didn't speak up protesting, but he never lied. He never lied. And he was asked to go under oath and do a couple lies. So this is how it worked with St. Thomas More. He was keeping to his own P's and Q's. He really wasn't going out and talking about it. He wasn't bad-mouthing the king. He did disagree with the king, but he was never saying anything about the king. He just said, I'm going to keep my own business. I'm going to try to float by, see if this moment will pass. But the king didn't want that because he knew that was the man of the most integrity of England. We've got to put him under oath, that under oath he agrees with everything I want. The king had 2 things. He wanted him to swear before God under oath that he believed. That the king was the head of the Church of England, and that the king's marriage, the first marriage, was an illicit marriage, and that his true wife was now Anne Boleyn. Could a good Catholic ever do that? No. It was completely impossible. A lot of people went under oath and did it. God have mercy on their soul. Hopefully they repent. He just refused to do it. And ultimately he was condemned and called a traitor and executed because he would not tell a lie under oath. That's integrity. And he ultimately provided a witness to Christ in that. It's not just that he was stubborn and wouldn't get along. No, he knew higher, better goods, and he had to live by them, live and die by them. And so that's where he ended up. He was a martyr. And that's why he's a saint this day. And we consider him, when we celebrate his feast day, we wear red vestments for a martyr, and we celebrate him as a martyr in the life of the church. I want integrity like that. When King Henry VIII said, this man is the conscience of England, I love that time. I've told people at daily Mass upstairs, I would love it if they said, this priest was the conscience of Colorado. And I hope it's true for you too. I hope that we have such a keen sense of the truth. Now, with such a magnanimity, we love persons constantly along the way, because it's hard to live the truth. But we have such a keen sense of it, and it's so integrated in us, that we will live and love and suffer and die by it. The offenses against the truth, which are enumerated by the Catechism. Now, it's interesting. In some of these other weeks, when I've done these talks, I try to find good art for you. How do you find art about immorality? So part of me was trying to be creative. So, yeah, there you go. I had to kind of dive into the bad Google search of art. So you're just going to forgive me today. I thank God I didn't have the 6th and the 9th commandments, because I don't know what I would have done for artwork for you on that one. So maybe it's better this way. So false witness or straight up perjury, that is when under oath before God you tell a lie. So you agreed to damn your soul, and you did, because you put yourself under an oath before God to do it. I mean, that's the worst of the worst right there. A disrespect for the reputation of others, ultimately for the good of the person, because the person has a dignity and a good. And the Catechism spells out 3 ways in which we can do that. Rash judgments is when you rush into an opinion or a judgment about another person without good foundation. It might be based on a sliver of a truth, but you've overdone it and then you've rushed into it. Now, you might even have been proven true in the long run, but you didn't have the grounds to make that accusation, that allegation, that judgment against a person. So, I mean, people do this all the time, right? We see people like, you gathered 1 or 2 little facts and then you rush to a conclusion that condemns somebody. That's called rash judgment. The other is detraction. Detraction is when you do know the moral fault or failing of another and you share it with persons who have no right to it. That's like straight up gossip. Gossip's actually a little form, because sometimes, I mean, I'm not approving it, but we use the word gossip to mean all sorts of things, from the little just like, did you see the neighbor's got a new car? I mean, we kind of have that spirit about it. But it could be up to this level of like, did you know the neighbor's been sleeping around? Maybe you know it because you saw it. Do you have a right to share that? No. It's not yours to share. It's not your truth. It's not your responsibility to tell other people. So when we speak a truth about the moral faults or failures of another to a person who has no right to it, we've committed detraction. It is a grave sin. If we knew it was wrong and we willfully did anyway, it's a mortal sin. This is grave matter. A lot of people do it a lot of the time, my friends. Let me tell you, this is a pretty heavy one, and it's really common in our culture. Calumny is when you make up something about another person that isn't true, but it's also against their character. So you're proposing something about their moral character, and it doesn't matter whether the person did it or not, because it's not even true. This is also grave matter. So it's like, maybe the neighbor isn't sleeping around, but you just make it up and propose it and gossip it up. I use that example because that's a big example, right? Like, I mean, like we were all like, "Ooh, yeah, you shouldn't be doing that." But these are the 3 main ways we have disrespect for the character of another. And I would encourage you, going forward, to actually use these right words. Because I, as a priest, hear a lot of people use the word gossip. Gossip's not in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Gossip's not like actually a main category of sin. I mean, I think we all know how we use it, but you know how nerdy I am, so guess what? We're now doing a little bit of etymology. Gossip is a word that develops in the early Middle Ages in England. It's an old English word, and it comes to us from the era of the 500s and 600s, by which time England was already Catholic. Now we have the practice in the life of the church of when a baby gets baptized, you go to another adult and you ask that person to be the sponsor of your baby. What do we call that position of the sponsor of a baby at baptism? That person is a godfather or a godmother. And so you enter into a relationship with the parents of that child because you are stepping in to be the godfather or the godmother. In the life of the church, we don't use the term anymore, but we used to have a term for the relationship that now exists between the godparent and the parents of the child, and that expression called the god sibling. That you are of the same generation and that you share a child in a certain sense. So the old expression was you're the god sibling. In Old English, that word's called gossip. That's all the word gossip means. You're just the god sibling. Now you can see as the word evolves over time, it's people you usually get you're close to, right? You share this child in your life, you're probably spending a lot of time, you're quite friendly, so you start talking too much. But it originally is about persons, and it became about what persons do together that's wrong. But the word itself doesn't mean essentially something that has to be wrong, but it means what you could do is wrong. Actually, it was in the 1500s, after the Protestant Reformation, for the first time in the history of English, that the word gossip had a bad ring to it. But other languages don't use the word gossip. Gossip's a pretty English-centric word. I mean, if you confess it to us, we'll probably know, but we actually might push into it a bit more. Okay, what form of gossip? Did you have a rash judgment against somebody? Did you full-on detract them? Or did you make up something with calumny? So I encourage you in your own examinations of conscience, in your own confessions in the future, for your own sake, actually know what it is and use the right words. Instead of just painting it over with kind of the veneer of gossip, because these are actually three different things, right? And the effects and the damage they do, they come out in three different ways. There's other offenses. These are lesser offenses. So these are not grave matter. These are words or attitudes that are encouraged or affirm others in malicious acts. You could raise to a level of gravity depending on the gravity of the act. When you flatter somebody, when you have adulation or complacence about them. So, I mean, the worst of the worst, I guess, would be, the mafia boss does a hit and kills somebody, and like, well, you've never killed somebody so well before. I mean, I guess that would be mortal sin, grave matter, flattery. Most people don't flatter like that, do they, though? So, I mean, I think flattery is that false praise of another that, like, you're heaping it on to endear yourself to them, but it's not fully sincere. Oh, the flattery usually comes out at the workplace. Bob, you gave a great presentation today. You didn't really mean that. But you want to curry some favor with Bob. Now, that wouldn't be about a malicious act. So flattery, when it's worse, though, is about people when they do wrong. And so maybe you saw Bob get away with lying to the boss at work. You saw him do it. You know he lied. And you go up and say, good on you, Bob. You got away with that one. That would be a flattery that's a sin. If it's not of a big grave matter, it's itself not a big grave sin, but it's still a sin. When you adulate and you offer the spirit of complacence to others in approving of their malicious acts. There can also be erroneous self-promotion. This is a lie that we're telling to promote ourselves. This is boasting and bragging. Now, it's okay to have a legitimate sense of self-esteem and legitimate promotion of yourself in right context, right? Every job interview has to be an opportunity in which you speak the truth about yourself and your own competency. So I'm not saying you have to be we have this false humility sometimes in our culture too. Oh, a truly humble person would never talk well of themselves. No! Sometimes you have to speak the truth about yourself. I am competent in these areas, and I will do a good job for you in this way. And that is neither boasting nor bragging. But if you layer it on a little thick, and you're like, I'm the answer to your every problem here at this corporation, like, I can do all these things, and you actually can't, well, now we're entering into a lie that is giving you an advantage. Because just think about it. Maybe you're not the best candidate for the job. Somebody else is. That other person didn't lie in the job interview, and you did lie. The justice would be that other person in justice should have gotten the job, not you. And a lot of people boast and brag and maybe get a job that wasn't theirs, wasn't justly theirs. So we just need to be persons of truth and not be afraid of the truth and know that God will bless us in the place of truth. Because why do people lie? It's usually out of self-preservation. It's out of a scarcity model. That somehow if I don't do this, I will lose, I will miss out, people will misunderstand me, I will get behind in life, something will go against me. If we just understood God to be a good, faithful, just, merciful, generous Lord, even in an imperfect world where other people do bad things, if we know that living in the light, living in the truth is good before God, we'll do it. And we shouldn't have anything to fear. We don't need to lie to get ahead. We don't need to misrepresent things. As the Catechism goes on, speaking of Disney, I had to give you the classic liar, the great parable of lying, Pinocchio. Lying itself is listed as one of the offenses. A lie consists in speaking a falsehood with the intention of deceiving. So says St. Augustine. I think it's rather textbook. I don't think any of us would argue with that. A lie is speaking a falsehood with the intention of deceiving. It's helpful that we throw that word intention in because sometimes, all of us, myself included, sometimes we've spoken a falsehood, but we thought it was true. I'm not saying, you can't do anything about that. Like, if you're in good faith and you've spoken a falsehood, don't get a scruple case. Now, if you've discovered something wasn't true and it had some kind of weight or serious element behind it, you actually have to go correct yourself. Right? So let's say, I'm trying to think of a good example. Oh, I'm going to throw Father John James under the bus here. He's just my easiest one to throw under the bus because we get along so well. So I'll give you a real example here from this last year at the cathedral. A parishioner who I don't think was in his full right mind gave us a large donation of cash. And he put it into the church poor box. But we saw him do it, and so we pulled it out with the thought, let's give it back to him because he's not in his right mind. Right? And we also know, like, he's poor, and he risked being kicked out of his own his own apartment. So, like, we're not going to let him give to the church when he's going to be kicked out of his own apartment for not paying the rent. God bless him. And so we put that in our safe room with the cash in the rectory. I have a whole room that is just safes and old files. I've got old records that go back to the 1850s. The oldest records of the Catholic Church in Colorado are in my basement over there. That's my safe room. Bishop Matchbook, Father Matchbook, on horseback, doing baptisms at the edges of rivers. He's writing all this down in the 1850s. I got that over there. And we put that money in that room. That money went missing. That money has gone missing from my safe room. And a lot of the staff have a key to that room. In duty, I had to send out emails. Isabel and Father, they all can testify to this. Father sent out emails. Who is in the safe room? Please retrace your steps. Please help me try to find the money. We've never found the money. But if I had said, that Father John James, we have a gym down there. He uses my gym a lot. And it's like right catty corner across the hall. I think, he was the last person I saw down there. Father John James stole the money. That's a falsehood. I'm presuming it's a falsehood, Father. But let's say I had somehow thought I had all my facts together. It's a falsehood, but I did not have the intent to deceive anybody. Right? So the intention's there. But if, when I come to a truth about that, oh no, he wasn't even here on the property that day, I have a moral duty to correct my story so people don't keep believing it, because then I might be guilty of a lie. Because all of a sudden, if I don't correct it, I'm in this place where my intention's now in limbo. So I would have a moral duty. Okay, listen up, everybody. I erroneously proposed Father John James is our thief. He could not have been the thief. Now, I might have committed rash judgment in there, but I wouldn't have committed detraction or calumny because I thought it was a truth, and it is a matter of importance to which my staff have a right to know. But as soon as I found out that what I had said, though a falsehood, was false, I have to correct it, or else I then commit a lie going forward. See how that works? So this becomes very important in your life, because you and I, we might have, for the best reasons, have spoken something that was false. But if we then learn the truth, and we've already put it out there, we've got to take it back. Because Father has a right to a good reputation. Father John James is not a thief, as far as I can tell. Yeah. Right. No. I should have done. Yeah. Right. 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 No, I think there is a due diligence question there, absolutely. And that's why I'm in the real life story. I didn't have like a real life example of anything here I could use in that example. But that was the best thing. It's always hard for a priest to give examples, let me just be honest, because when we do have real examples, we're not allowed to talk about them. So I had to make something up to give you an example there. Yes, it was morally incumbent upon me to do my best due diligence. So thus I had to form an investigation. I had to ask the staff to retrace their path. I had to ask them all to send me an email documenting their paths. I had to get to this because there's a justice on the line about a poor man and his ability to stay at his apartment. The ultimate answer that I'm going to tell you is I've said we will give him the money, if it's the cathedral's money or his money, but he will have his money and I will take the hit, not him.
I will be robbed from, rather than let that man be robbed from. If that makes sense. That's the actual answer that the cathedral took to that question. But yes, I had to do a big investigation. I can't dial in, like, there is a due diligence, but also, yeah, right, right. I think the way that most of the moral doctors, you do to the best of your ability that you can do. And not everyone's got the same resources or the same intellectual capabilities. So you do the best that you can to arrive at a truth. But I do think you do have a moral duty to check something out before you hand it on. And there's going to be levels of that. I mean, I pretty much, anything that I see as clickbait on the internet, I just consider it almost de facto as probably something I can't trust. And so I never pass anything on that I get as clickbait on the internet. Some of it might be true, but I don't have a way to test it. I don't have the ability to do that. I don't have the resources to test everything on the internet. So I usually hold back. Now, the question is, I also don't have the ability to test everything that comes across the news. And there's been enough cases where things have been misrepresented. And maybe not even always willfully or intentionally, but just accidentally. So part of it is we live constantly in this tension of we do the best that we can, knowing that there are falsehoods or full lies in front of us. But we do our best to not perpetuate them. And yeah, due diligence is the best word for it. But also most people can't, you could develop a scruple case of trying to investigate everything, and you just can't. At some level, we have to just have a fundamental trust for each other as well. And that's hard. I mean, I don't know about my family. There's been lies that have been told for generations. And then only later do they come out. I don't think my family's unusual. Right? I mean, I've got a cousin who doesn't know her true paternity in my family. Whose truth is that to tell? I mean, this is the hard stuff. I mean, I'm going to hate it when she does 23andMe. You know, there's whole support groups out there right now for paternity cases around 23andMe. People innocently took that test, and they're like, wait, I'm only a half sibling to the rest of my siblings? What happened? Oh, Lord help us. When we seek to lead someone else into error, we're doing violence to them because that right to truth. So there's a question of intention comes in here again. I'm purposefully leading you into error. If I don't have that intention, I mean, I might be innocent. So we shouldn't beat ourselves up. But if we've come to learn something was erroneous, we should correct it. Especially if the gravity of it was so large. I mean, if it's something small like the fellow who made the dinner in the rectory, he made pepperoni, not sausage pizza. But I had all day long told Father John James, we're having sausage pizza. Well, that's not a grave matter. I'm not morally bound to, wait, Father, before you go into the kitchen, you must know it's pepperoni tonight, not sausage. But let's say Father were allergic to the food, and I had said something he could eat, and then I found out he couldn't eat it. Well, I have a moral duty to tell him the truth there. Lying is the most direct offense against truth, says the Catechism. The gravity of a lie, thus whether it's mortal or venial, depends on the nature of the truth it deforms the intention of the one who did the lying, and the harm suffered by the lie itself. So there are some lies that have graver nature to them. So this is the difference between the white lie, though it's still not good. It's still objectively a lie, so that's a sin. But it's very venial sin. It's, does this dress make me look fat? Maybe you think so. You told her, no, you're fine. Well, it's a lie, but it's a white lie. That's not very grave. But there are grave lies. And we all know that. Use your own imagination to cook up some more. Lies become mortal when it does the injury to justice and charity itself. Especially when one's injustice. There will be a repercussion that's grave because of the very lie itself. Which is why it's always easiest to point to things like lying on the witness stand. Your lies could send a man to prison for the rest of his life, or let a murderer go free. Now that's the extreme example, but there's a lot of other lower cases, right? And our lies could probably affect how people are in relationship with each other, how they enter into marriage, how they're getting jobs, how they're pursuing all the normal things that we need the truth to be a part of. And the Catechism points out that when there's been a lie, there's a duty of reparation. This is a hard one, because that takes so much humility, right? To say, I said a lie, or I misled you. I mean, if it's a simple, easy one, like sausage and pepperoni, oh, that's easy. But it's like, oh no, I told you something that wasn't true, and maybe I willfully told you something that wasn't true. I misled you. I led you on. I got to set that right. Ultimately, it's a respect for the truth, for persons. Because persons, they need to live in this relationship with each other. But now, that said, the right of communication of truth is not unconditional. So not everyone in every circumstance has to tell everything. You can't lie, but you can't tell everything. Not everyone has the same rights to the truths about others. The neighbor in the next house over doesn't have a right to the truth about everything going on in that household. I think we all know that. The good of respecting the privacy, keeping silence sometimes, discretion in language, seeking to avoid scandal. These are legitimate things. That doesn't mean cover up. Avoiding scandal doesn't mean cover up per se. But it means that we don't have to make something worse than it already is with people who don't need it to be worse than it is. Some people, I think, have a certain love of just keeping information out there and sharing it and putting everybody's business in front of everybody else to get them up, all riled up. No one is bound to reveal the truth to someone who doesn't have the right to it. Now, some interesting questions in there. You have to really dig into that. Who has the right to certain truth at certain times? I think those are the questions, though. I think that's something that maybe you come to a certain bit of information and you're like, can I share this? Or am I obliged to share this? With whom can I share this? Does that person have the right to this truth? I don't know. For me, an easy example in like a family situation is, let's say that, a teenager. You've got a teenager, your teen brings another teen over, you're really close to the family. These two families are super close. The other teen comes over, and the other teen, somehow it gets back to you about something horrible they're doing. Or maybe the teen's suffering in some way. Maybe the teen's got some deep depression that maybe the parents don't know about. And so as you come to that information, you have to ask yourself, do I have an obligation to share this with the parents? And probably at certain times you would, because the parents have the right to know about their kid. I mean, in law, there's certain ways that we've absolutely done this. Father James, John James and I, because of our being priests, there's a lot of professions that share this with us, are mandatory reporters of different sorts of abuse. In this state, every state in this country, nobody would question the morality of this. We are obliged to call social services or the police when we come to learn about certain things. The abuse of a child by any form, the abuse of an elderly person, or the abuse of an adult of limited capacity. I had a priest buddy just 2 weeks ago discovered that one of his elderly parishioners, that the elderly parishioner's granddaughter was milking grandma of her money, stealing her money, and letting her live in squalor. Literally, the priest went over to the house and it smelled like nothing's been changed or done. I mean, it was human rot in the house. And he picked up from the conversation that all of her money was disappearing. So, I mean, not only maybe the priest could have corrected the granddaughter, but he actually had a moral obligation under law in the state of Colorado to go to the civil authorities and say, I think there's elder abuse going on. So I think that's an example of when we have the obligation. But there's going to be times when it's not our obligation. So these are the things that we have to weigh. And I don't have an easy calculus for this always. I put this image up here because there are such things as professional secrets, we'll call them, where we've given privilege. We've recognized that by the very nature of certain relationships, what's in that relationship does not have to be repeated. So that's a lawyer and her client. So that's the client-lawyer privilege. We've just acknowledged that in law for a very long time, that what you as an individual tell your lawyer who's giving you legal advice, that's a privileged relationship. So we've put it with medicine as well, right? We've got HIPAA laws. The information about your health is not for public consumption. They're usually very strict about that. And the highest level of a professional secret is the sacrament of confession. And we would say, as Catholic priests, that it rises to such a high level, there must always be a guarantee that somebody has a right to unburden their conscience and to confess what they need to confess, that the greatest good is actually salvation of souls, and we must always offer that. So even if a state or a society changed its laws in a way that would force us to have to reveal sins, that we would not do that. There's actually been priest martyrs who died because they kept the seal of the sacrament when the state did not want the priest to do that. Now, we are not in the business of desiring to cover over grave indiscretions, but we're also not the primary source that needs to be the detectives to get to those points of truth. So we have professional secrets. That's the way the Catechism describes these privileged relationships. It's interesting, even in the state of Colorado, most states in this country, we consider marriage of such a privileged relationship, you can't testify against your spouse. It's an inadmissible form of testimony. Because even marriage, you're so close that you should be able to hold each other's lives in that way. And even the private lives and persons must be honored. I mean, we're all imperfect, but we all don't have the right to pry, and everyone has a fundamental right to a good reputation until they've lost it so publicly. But we have to presume the best of others, and we have to just give them the grace. And it's not our job to pry, and it's not our job to speak ill of other people. Which opens us up to, of course, that happens on a one-on-one basis, but the church for the last couple hundred years has said, well, there's ways you can tell truth or lies in larger context, so the social means of communication. That's kind of the way I find that the Catholic Church always writes about any media-related thing. So whether it's television, radio, internet, podcasts, our kind of catch-all is the social means of communication. I put a little Walter Cronkite up there for you. Information by media must be provided at the service of the common good for all. So things that would go out for all to help form and guide a society must be for the legitimate common good of all, and not for either the benefit of just one, the illegitimate benefit of one individual or one part of the society. A society has a right to information that's based on truth. best as it can be known, trying to build up the freedom, the justice of the society, and a solidarity of standing with each other in that common pact of trying to pursue the common good together. If the media or any individual or entity militated against these, we'd have a problem. The church has said, though, the media has to avoid something. They must avoid forming a passivity among viewers and consumers of media. And it tells us to moderate our approach and our use to social media. Isn't that an interesting thing? Because the idea, I think, there is you could just be lulled into either ways to think, or that you are just a mere bystander in your society, that you're not called to do anything of direct action. And so it's kind of on the media, that their side of it, that this is to help form a society, not to just rule over a society. And then the individual person has to be moderate. So that question of moderation, it's a question of prudence. How do I take the media in? It's not that it's no to media, but what is my right use of it? How do I sort through it? How do I try to do my best due diligence even with the media? It's hard. I mean, I hate saying I studied broadcasting for a couple of years in college. I guess when I was in college, I didn't see any direct biases. I just saw these college kids who just wanted to say the news. Maybe they had biases. I don't know. But then it's hard for me to, flip through cable TV channels, because they all seem to have it, just their own version of it. Sometimes I just try to listen to a little bit of all of it to see, okay, how do we piece all this together between MSNBC and Fox News and some of these other sources out there? It's hard. It's hard for me. I don't know about you. It's hard to kind of sort through what's going on today. But I also don't want to be so closed off and to everybody and suspicious constantly of everybody. I mean, I just don't know if I can live like that. Just total suspicion of everybody all the time. I just have a gut instinct. My fundamental approach has got to be, I got to trust you until you prove me I can't trust you kind of approach. The Catechism reminds us that journalists have a duty to serve the truth. And there's a condemnation in the Catechism of any totalitarian state's use of propaganda or repressive thought crimes. So this is basically when the state takes over the means of communication and uses them just to advance a party policy, or then calls some free thought that is worth having in the course of a society, like, you can't have that thought, you can't have that, and so the society shuts down any pursuing of the truth around a matter, and usually the language that we get out of that is thought crime, kind of offenses. But this is interesting because these are ways in which truth can be perverted, but the Catechism doesn't want us just to merely see the perversion of truth. We also want to see the flowering of truth. And so we're presented with the concepts of truth going with beauty, opening the door to things like sacred art that speak volumes to the truth. So truth carries with it the joy and the splendor of a spiritual beauty. Because if we believe ultimate truth is a personal reality grounded in the person of Christ, and it flows from him, well, if he's one of the three persons of the Trinity, the incarnate Lord, God made man, that by definition is good and beautiful. He is beautiful. And so truth will point back to him. And truth will lead us to God. So the revelation of truth, by its very definition, must be beautiful. If that which is of God, that which is of the truth of God, becomes known to us, that's beautiful. We should be loving that. So God himself God created, it says in the Genesis, in the image of God. Man created us in the image and likeness of God. So man, we human beings somehow express God and the truths of God. And we can then turn around in our own creative genius and by our own abilities try to capture some of the truths of God and of man, of the human race, of religious things, in artistic works, for instance. It's not the only way. It doesn't have to be all painting. But I think sometimes, have you ever had an encounter? It doesn't have to be even religious painting. Sometimes you come up against a good piece of art and say, This is doing just more than beauty. There's a truth being conveyed in this image. Art is a distinctively human form of expression. Artwork is thus a form of, as the church calls it, practical wisdom, a uniting of knowledge and of skill together to express these things. I've been sometimes more moved by a beautiful image or a movie than I have by just like a reading of text. Sometimes music does it. Like, oh my goodness, there was something to that. It's not just on the level of the pathos. It actually led me into an encounter with something that's of truth. Because ultimately, these things that reflect truth, they bear likeness to God's own activities. We're doing these things. We're somehow being like unto God. Sacred art is true and beautiful when it invokes and glorifies, in a spirit of faith and adoration, the transcendent mystery of God. And genuine sacred art would ultimately lift us up and draw us to adore God and lead us to prayer. And if you haven't had it yet, I hope you do have a moment where you can come across like a beautiful piece of sacred art, and knowing the story behind it, the faith, the claims of it, how it has ramifications on human life, that like that moment it connects in front of a good piece of sacred art for you. I remember one day I was in London. That's why this image is up here. This is an image at the National Gallery in London, the Dutch painter. I can't remember which one it is. But I remember I was going through, it's in that part of the National Gallery of London, it's all religious art, it's all Catholic art. And yet I turned a corner, and I just saw this. I mean, I was like overwhelmed by so much religious art. And it's kind of an occupational hazard for me, right? I see lots of religious art. I'm usually not deeply moved, but something when I rounded the corner and saw this, and the crowns, and Jesus, and those tears, like something was like, there's a truth claim here. And it's bearing on the whole world, and it's on me. And something of me has to come into contact and dialogue with this. Because this reflects in art what actually happened. Of course, there's some artistic license in like the portrayal of it, because we didn't have a photograph, but we don't need a photograph. We know the event happened. We know Christ was crowned with thorns when he suffered and died. In his suffering and death, we believe by faith to be meritorious for the whole world and for me. And I exist in relationship to that. And when I saw this, like it became more real for me. This was like a truth that was being presented to me all over and again. And I just started weeping in the National Gallery in front of this piece of artwork, which is always a little embarrassing for me out in public. Like, I'm one of those types who like wants to hide the tears. But I'll tell you, that happened to me in a room. I mean, I was not in like the mood. I mean, I'm not in the mood to just cry. I'm not that type. Like, there was something that happened there. So when I was trying to find an example of where all this comes together, truth, beauty, and sacred art, I actually thought last year, I was like, oh, there was that time in the National Gallery of London, around to that corner, and he was there. He was there. So next time, I apologize for going over. There's always these things I get passionate about. Father John James will be back next week, and we're going to start diving into the sacraments. Some of you are going to be prepared for these two. Some of you are just along the ride, deepening your own faith, sharing it with others, and some in our midst are actually getting baptized and confirmed this month by the Archbishop at the Easter Vigil. And we want to make sure that we have an ample opportunity to talk about what's actually happening in those sacraments, how God's working, how he's loving us in those sacraments. So, because I went over time, if there's any question, I want to entertain them, but I'll do that one-on-one up here, because I don't want to keep you all, especially as we're heading into this storm. I don't think it started up yet, but we'll get you out. Everybody's, like the whole town shut down tomorrow anyway, so you all are wonderful. Let's say glory be in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Be safe. Be warm tomorrow. God love you.